All right. What's happening, folks? I'm just switching over some sound settings. And we can go ahead and get started in a sec here. All right, let's switch layouts and kick off today's jam stream session. And with that, we are here. I see folks in chat. I see Eric asking, is this Eurovision? No, this is not Eurovision. I am broadcasting live from the United States. Sour Lad dropping the worm rave. What's up, Sour Lad? Core Break, Naked Snake. Welcome to the jam stream, folks. I'm doing some real quick tweaks on sound. Let me know if you folks have trouble hearing me. I'm basically using the same setup from a couple days ago, since I'm using the same sound device, and everything should be good. I need to make sure the levels don't get funky when I'm actually making mouth noises, but speaking volume should be fine. In fact, if I turn this up, then I could test if my effects are actually going in. Yeah, I'm going to put everything about there. Hey, Iconic swinging through. Iconic says, can't stay a moment, but dropping in to wish you the best with jams. Much love, stay awesome. Thanks, Iconic. Always appreciate you dropping by to bless the stream. Let's see, make sure effects are working. I think reverb, yeah, that's good. Everything else should be locked in. And Iconic redeemed a hydrate reminder. Will do. I got a giant jug of water right here, which I'll most likely need to refill at some point. Oh, I should double check and make sure all of the other redeems are on. I turned off a couple. When we were doing Monster Hunter. Let me make sure the other ones are back on. All right, there we go. Drop a beat and factor back on. Although it doesn't necessarily make sense for people to redeem the drop a beat one here, since that's the whole point of the stream. But if they wanted to, they could. All right, so what are we going to be doing today? Today we're going to be doing a mix of practice and sound discussion like we normally do. One thing to mention, I don't know if it's going to actually come into play today, but I'm experimenting with something new that is through Discord. I don't know if it's going to actually affect anything on stream, but if it does, I'll explain what's going on. There might be some surprises, there might not. We'll see. But aside from that, we will be kind of following our regular schedule of doing some practice and discussion about beatboxing stuff. But I do want to focus a decent amount today on loop station stuff, because I've been doing some research over the week, and I learned some new things I want to experiment with here on stream to show you guys. I see Core Breaks testing out the Discord command. Still no Discord Core Break. This thing I'm talking about is not related to my Discord that I'm still working on. That will have an official announcement when it's done. I need to still figure out why I can't see pings in my own Discord. it is still my goal to get that hopefully up and running and live for all of you folks by the summer. But I need to go find a Discord expert that can tell me why what in my settings is hosed. The people I have testing it for me, whenever they talk, I can't see any pings in the channels, and I don't know why. I've checked the setting perms and everything to make sure. It's weird, but I will figure that out at some point in the future. Also, as a bit of an update, I checked to see how close rather I was to getting follower emotes, and according to the Twitch eligibility things they have for affiliates, I have to stream 60 days as an affiliate, not be streaming for a time duration of 60 days since getting affiliate. It's got to be 60 days worth of streaming, and I think I'm about halfway there. So hopefully by June or maybe mid-June, depending on how many streams I do per week, that will be enabled. Once it is, I will post something on Twitter, and folks that are following will have access to their own emotes. Because right now it's just for sub tiers. I wish it wasn't that restricted, but them's the rules. Starlad says, good luck. Yeah, it's really more a matter of time. As long as you don't have any sort of violations or your emotes get pulled for being, inappropriate. As long as that doesn't happen, it's just a matter of time. So we'll see. All right, I think we're good on sound settings. I'll be keeping an eye on the audio readout. Whenever you see me with my eyes closed, it means I'm looking down either at OBS on my screen or down at my loop, which is in front of me as I'm standing up. So we'll go ahead and get started with some warm-up stuff and make sure we tweak any audio things along the way. So let's see, we'll run through some kind of simple beats, get the blood flowing, get warmed up, and then kind of segue into technique discussion from there. So let's go ahead and get started. Switch. All right. Someday I'll do that endurance beat idea I keep talking about. I think it'd be a fun challenge to do one day. So let's see. We worked in a little bit of outward K snares, BGM snares. We need to continue to warm up stuff with the inwards K snares and PF snares. Usually the four main ones I use, I try and work into just the practice routines because they're all done in different parts of the mouth, so they warm the mouth up differently. The PF and BGM snares are lip based. The inwards K is tongue based. And what was the fourth one? PF, BGM, inwards K, outwards K is also tongue based, sort of in different directions. So you could do something like string a whole bunch of the snares together if you wanted, but it wouldn't really make for a good beat, which is why I tend to switch between the tempos and the style of the beat whenever I'm warming up, just to get the muscles warmed up in the mouth and kind of jump between the different positions. Like we've talked about before, the real trick to learning efficiency in beatboxing is learning how to sort of change between different positions, which is mostly just muscle memory once you've learned a technique. So if I was to consecutively do different snares that have different places in the mouth, it would sound like if you're going inwards K snare to PF snare, it would sound like, and it's difficult to do those back to back because one is done using inhaling air and tongue position, and the other is done with exhaling and a lip position, which is why the PF snare normally sounds like. But if you're going from a to the, it doesn't sound clean because you're going. And if you're doing it in a beat, doing like a double snare in there, it would sound really, really messy because you're trying to jump from a really different position. And that's good practice to get proficient at, just so you're used to changing positions. Sorry that I redeemed another hydrate. I can go through a lot of water today. But I think it could be fun to do kind of like a series of drills where you're having to cycle between different snares, like a snare drill, and learn to alternate between the different positions. So you might go like inward K, PF, outward K, BGM, and do those four slowly back to back, and then ramp up over time and see how seamlessly you can jump between the different positions and techniques. So if we were to test it in practice, it might sound like those are the three in kind of like a chord note pattern or a single note pattern. And if you're trying to do just chord notes, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be pretty challenging. Wonder how easily I could do it. I can test it here. So something like, I gotta remember the order every single time. So let's see. Seems like to me the outwards K to BGM or outwards K to any of the other ones would probably be the easiest because it's still outwards. The inwards K is the one where you're breathing in slightly, so its momentum is going in a different direction. Because you could do something like an outwards K to a BGM snare and do something like, or outwards K to PF, which is close to the same position, and it would sound like, I don't know. I'll have to think about whether or not that makes for a productive drill type, because it's definitely hard. It's really unnatural to do just based on how my muscle memory is in beatbox technique. So I'll think about whether or not I want to potentially make that something, if I can formulate into like an actual drill that'll work and be good practice, then maybe we'll talk about that in the future. But as far as practice beats go, continue to work on basses and outward snares like PF and inward ones like the inward snare. So I'll run through some real quick simple drills, and then from there we'll sort of segue into sound theory discussion, which I don't have a whole lot today, but we'll see what we can come up with. So let's see. Another thing that I've been sort of wrestling around with when it comes to trying to figure out the best way to approach warm-ups and practice stuff for these jam streams is the best way to warm up the throat-based basses, if that makes sense. So throat bass, vibration bass, and vocalized chest are the three primary sung, in quotes, basses I use. And trying to come up with a good way to do warm-ups for those is kind of challenging for me, because when I'm on stream here talking with all of you folks and we're going through different types of content for the jam stream, I'm already talking constantly, which stresses my voice out over time, and my voice tends to get tired. Because the basses are all primarily done through putting strain on vocal cords to make the sounds, it means my voice is going to get tired faster, but in different parts of the throat, if that makes sense. When I'm talking, it's just a regular speaking voice. It doesn't put any pressure on anything, but my sort of register in my voice gets affected by whatever it is I'm doing. So if I'm sitting here talking with you folks and we're discussing technique or anything, and I spend a lot of time doing a really low or heavy bass, then chances are it's going to make me start to sound raspy, because it's going to be stressing my voice out over time. And it's kind of like a race whenever I'm streaming, because, again, I'm talking constantly and I'm doing things that additionally stress my voice out. When I'm just at home by myself, no one around practicing, I'm not talking to anybody. So I could sit there and do bass practice for an hour and it'll stress my voice out, but it won't do it quite as fast because, again, I'm not talking to people. So it's kind of a balancing act that I'm still trying to figure out, because the ability to do different basses in beatboxing is heavily dependent on being able to warm up your throat and sort of have it be in top condition. And it's difficult when you're trying to juggle that with speaking, which is why it's good to do the loop station stuff, because it gives my voice a little bit of a break, because I can sit there. One, I can sit instead of stand, and two, it allows me to not be constantly putting that strain. I'll have to think about that, because I find that it takes a little bit for my voice to warm up to be able to do some of my lower basses effectively. And sometimes we sort of plow through warm up and get into sound theory discussion and practice and, pattern construction stuff without spending a ton of time warming up. And I'm kind of doing it as a catch up, but that's okay. So if we segue into the actual sound theory discussion and techniques, things related to beatboxing, there was something I wanted to focus on that's kind of related to what we practice after the sound theory discussion or along the way. And that's the idea of drills, kind of building off of what we were talking about in the intro with doing snare practice, and muscle memory practice to learn how to kind of jump around between different techniques. I want to spend some time focusing on the idea of repetition and drills for sound theory discussion, because for anybody who's curious about learning beatboxing and wants to get started, sometimes it can be difficult to know, where do I start practicing? You might have an idea of the techniques you want to learn, or you see someone do a sound or a bass or like a unique sound and say, that's really cool, I want to learn how to do that, so I just need to learn the technique. But then you sit there and go, okay, I know how to do the technique and I need to get better at it. How am I going to fit that into practice so that I'm drilling and getting the repetition to get better at whatever it is the sound is going to ultimately sound like from, the creator you're learning from. So for drills, I find that it kind of depends on what you're trying to learn and what you're trying to practice. And so we're talking about forcing the mouth to learn different muscle memory techniques to sort of jump. But even outside of that, you can focus on specific sounds and just structure your training around getting consistent with just the one sound. So the best way is probably to demonstrate that. And I wish I knew how to activate the metronome that's built into my loop station. It's in here somewhere, but I never use it. Is it this? That is incredibly loud. Let me see which one of my knobs affects the output on that, since that's like a built-in rhythm thing. I never use this, so let's see if I can figure out how to use it. Let's see. Apologies if this sounds loud while I figure out how to get the volume down. Output. New. Not instrumental, and it's not output. I am not going to mess with that for now because it's showing red line in OBS, so I hope I didn't blow anybody's eardrums out testing that. But even without using an actual metronome, the drill methodology that we're going to talk about is the same, and I'll try and explain it. Hey, Edward's here. Edward says, the old beat it button. Yeah, I've never used that rhythm button. I don't know what it does, aside from start doing a rhythm. Oh, it's pattern. Okay, does this have a volume setting? Rhythm level? If I turn this down. That's it. That's the volume level. There we go. Set to 100 causes it to go red line immediately. That's good to know. Okay, I guess we're gonna learn about this particular feature I never use. So this, I'm assuming, is used for doing rhythm based either patterns or, it's like a tool. And it's got baked in beats, it sounds like. So this is 1. This is 2. This is 3. And I bet this is synced to the default BPM tempo that's part of the loop when there's nothing recorded. Here's beat 4. There's a lot of these. This is beat 5. Oh, you can actually change it to one this is called downbeat, which makes sense. This is what they call rock pattern 1. Rock 2, like a break beat. Kind of a modified amen break almost. It's like a hard rock beat. Jeez, there's a lot of these. Oh, there's a million of these. Okay, we're not going to go through all of them. Interesting. I may have to play around with that rhythm thing. I don't really know what you'd use it for other than to sort of sample or structure beats, but it's kind of interesting that it's built in here. It's kind of like a synthesizer. But on the topic of drills, I was hoping I could find the metronome so I could just set up, like a simple click track to demonstrate. Like, I could actually just do one on the loop here, but for the sake of what I'm talking about with drills, it doesn't really matter. We don't need a guide. Edward says, can you put effects on them? I don't know. Let's try it. Okay, nothing here. These aren't considered tracks, so I think these are just baked in sounds that are playing back because I'm trying track level effects. It doesn't do anything. But I wonder if you can record. No, it's a separate output from everything else on the loop. It looks like it's playing back through the same sources, but it's not treated like an actual recorded track. So I can't put effects on them unless input works. No. This is just inputting on anything that's coming through the mic. Huh. It's good to know. So if we go back to our previous example, and we're talking about how to drill for, let's say, a PF snare. One of the more basic ones that people learn in the beginning when they're getting into beatboxing. And that's just the... So if you were sitting there after learning the technique, you learn how to put the P sound and the F sound together to get one sound to come out and get the... And then you're thinking, okay, what's the best way to just drill the sound? Because I want to do nothing but practice PF snares and get good at the sound and get clean. You could put it into a beat and do a simple beat and then just practice doing the snare wherever it's supposed to hit in the beat. You do something like... And, do that forever. That's perfectly fine practice. And it will teach you how to be consistent and to keep tempo and to keep things consistent when it comes to slotting the sound with other sounds. But you don't have to do it that way. You could also take the sound and then just sort of practice on the beat, like on quarter notes when you're just learning out. 4/4 time, just doing this. And you'll find that even doing it slowly, but back to back like that is not easy. I would say I'm not super great at it because I don't usually practice that way for snares, but maybe I should, because just sitting there doing a simple quarter note line in 4/4 and trying to keep the meter consistent, but also the sound consistent and get that snare to be hitting at just the same sort of pitch, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to change the pitch of the snare and go up or down with it, but just trying to be consistent. You do that for 5 minutes, just doing back to back. You'll probably find that your ability to do the sound gets improved over time, your consistency gets better over time, and the kind of cleanliness of the sound gets better. And then let's say you do that for 5 to 10 minutes every day for a week as part of your other practice and things that you're doing to learn sounds. Say, okay, I'm going to do PF snare practice for 5 minutes, and you just practice with quarter notes. You do that for a week, kind of see where you start and end as far as progression, and you should be able to see the sound improve. After that, you move up to eighth notes. You get more of a rapid line of PF snares, and you see how well you can do that. And so if we tried in practice, instead of just a 1, 2, 3, 4, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 in eighth notes. And for PF snares, that's not easy to do. And if I try it, it sounds like I can do it, but if I were to try and do it for 5 minutes, I'm sure it would fall off after the first 2 minutes. And so you kind of step up your complexity over time, and being able to do rapid fire PFs is pretty useful. I don't really do that in a lot of my beats, but it would be something useful to have. So like a double snare for PFs, it might sound like that's actually really hard. Trying to do that in like a 16th notes is very, very difficult. You also almost have to do a kick PF, but you could do a. That's something I'm not very good at. I'm going to have to practice that. Other snares, depending on their position, lend themselves to doing chains back to back a little bit easier. Like an outwards K, that sound, that's a lot easier to do back to back in like a double K 16th note, because you can just reset the mouth position easier than the PF, which uses your lips. So that's how you get something like a. And in the same beat, it might be. There's also another way to do a double K by using a K sound to a rim shot, which is part of the. You can do it that way too. Another thing that I probably should practice more, because I'm still working on slotting in technicality for the TKK into beats I use. But we're talking about how to apply like a rapid sound to the different types of snares. Interestingly enough, I think the BGM or spit snare probably lends it to a rapid snare a little more easy, but the way you do it is a lot harder, if that makes sense. So if you're taking the regular BGM, I'll keep an eye on the audio readout, make sure I'm not killing anybody here, and you do 1. Okay, and I'm going to try and point slightly in a different direction. This is the one that seems to hit the hardest on the mic. But if we take the. You could reset and do it back to back and do a. That is not easy to do either. But it's just practice getting the mouth position so you can do the burst quickly. But another way to make a rapid BGM snare is to use your tongue. If you're a wind instrument player, it's like a tonguing technique to get like a staccato rhythm, to break up your airflow to get a sharp hit. You can do that when doing the BGM snare too. And by using your tongue to interrupt the flow instead of starting over and doing this whole snare again, that's how you go from to, and you're not having to stop and reset it again. So the difference, for comparison, if I'm doing 2 BGM snares back to back, it sounds like, you can kind of hear the way it cuts off and restarts. But if I'm doing a tongued rapid BGM snare, it sounds like, and it doesn't sound like it's restarting. So instead of getting that cut off, you're basically getting an interrupted airflow that breaks it up into 2. And I think I've talked about this maybe a long time ago when I introduced the BGM snare, because it's one of my personal favorites. You can practice that over time, and once you get really precise with interrupting that airflow with the tip of your tongue, you can do a run of rapid BGM snares in a row. And I don't see too many people do it this way, because there's a different technique that I'm not good at for doing multiple BGM snares. But if you do it in one breath, in one airflow, using your tongue, it sounds like. And that could be kind of a useful thing to mix up, because it's very distinct sounding. It sounds like a machine gun almost. And that's just done by interrupting the airflow. I'm not doing a literal restarted BGM snare every single time. But doing that in a beat is a little more tricky because you have to be able to control that airflow with your tongue and then transition to whatever else you're doing in a beat. And Sour Lad Redeemed Hydrate will do. Thank you for the reminder. So on the topic of drills, if we're talking about snares specifically, I think it's best to, again, start slow and then just get into the routine of practicing just simple quarter notes for whatever snare you're practicing. Doesn't matter where it comes from. And then drill that until you feel like you can do it in your sleep. And then from there, up the complexity. And if you have a metronome, which I should probably look into how to activate that because it is built into this machine. I just don't know where it is. If you use a metronome, then it makes it even easier to practice on beat. You can up and decrease your BPMs to practice faster. You can make an irregular rhythm so that you're practicing doing snares on different offbeats and different cadences so that it's forcing you to sort of adapt. The teacher I studied under for beatboxing very frequently reiterates that one of the best tools for beatboxing is a metronome. And he was right. I don't use it a lot now, but it's definitely helpful when you're learning, and you can really use it at any point. You shouldn't just use a metronome when you're a beginner. You can always benefit from having something that'll allow you to keep track of the tempo of stuff. And that was a tip that he always gave his students, and he said it helped them a lot. When it comes to technicality and a lot of rhythm-based sounds, having something that's giving you like a real consistent meter is pretty helpful. And so I'd pass that on to anybody who's interested in learning beatboxing. You can get, I think it's Brenner. There's a free metronome you can just get on your phone. Doesn't cost anything, and it'll allow you to set tempos and set tracks, and it's a perfect tool to learn. So definitely work that in as one of your tools when it comes to practicing the sounds, and not just snares too. You can use it to practice any sort of beats and just focus on letting that sort of built-in reoccurring tempo guide how you're learning. All right, so sort of segueing into the next part of the sound theory discussion on drills and techniques. We talked at length many times about technicality in my ongoing work with the TKK. I'm not really going to focus on that one today because I talk about it a lot, but I wanted to focus on different drills for different technicality patterns that I've used. And so this isn't something I think I've talked about at all. And I think it'd be good to sort of demonstrate because it's kind of an alternative to what I've been explaining for just the TKK, ad nauseum and all these streams. So what does that mean? If we're thinking about like a string of combos and sound sets for technicality that's not TKK. So we've talked a lot about the TKP or KPT sound set that I use. The first ones I learned when it came to technicality, right? One pattern that I use, I don't know what the rhythm is called because I don't think it's a standard 4/4. I think Edward, if you're here, you know terminology for rhythm stuff better than I do. I don't know what the tempo of this pattern is specifically called. I just know that I created it to be able to drill this technicality pattern. So what does it sound like? It's a mix of TKPs and hats ending with an outwards case snare as part of the pattern, and then it loops. So what does it sound like? The technicality pattern sounds like if we're just doing it, I'll run through a couple cycles and we'll see if we can nail down any specifics. But it sounds like. And so I'm not going to bother writing the notation. I'd have to sit there and do it note by note, and I won't waste your time with that. But it starts with kicks. I think it's BTB, TKP. That's the first set before it repeats. I tend to mix up my kicks a little bit around that snare, but the whole cycle of the rhythm is that. And again, I haven't really talked about this on stream when it comes to technicality, but this is the pattern that I use a lot to just drill over and over again when practicing the TKPs and the BTB kicks. And I might see if I can write it out at some point in the future in case anyone wants, the note by note. Edward says, I think it is 4/4. It might be just a moderate tempo 4/4. Again, I'm not good at rhythm notation because I'm not a percussionist, but it is handy because if you do it really slow, you learn the individual sounds and you just get good consistency practice, which we were talking about before. It's very important when it comes to just, getting that consistency and cleanliness of sounds. But for actual speed and consistency practice, one thing that I've been trying to mess around with lately, and this is why I want to talk about it on stream today, if you're taking this cycle pattern of sounds and start speeding it up incrementally as you're practicing it, that's when you get a lot more stress on consistency and, stringing together sounds over a long period of time if you're just doing it as a drawn out drill. And so you could put that into a beat. I don't think I've really done it too much, but outside of a beat, just as a drill, I find it pretty handy. And I've been trying to focus on pushing it faster because components of that practice loop of sounds for that drill, I put into all sorts of stuff. Things that alternate from kick to TKPs or other sounds. You hear me do it in beats quite often. It's something I do, in fact, kind of a lot if you start thinking about it whenever I'm doing freestyle stuff, and it's coming from that practice. So things like just in that, it's using fragments of that overall circular loop of sounds. That's where I learned to do it consistently. And so I kind of think it'd be fun to use that as sort of our benchmark for speed in the future. So if we were to take the loop and just try and force a faster speed, let's see, I can just try it here. If we're going, I can speed it up a little bit. And what I was practicing the other day when I was trying to figure out how to explain this on stream is you start slowly mixing in other technicality sounds into that same rhythm pattern, and it forces you to practice transitioning from those. So you add an F sound in the middle, and that changes the way the whole rhythm sounds and the way it flows. So if we're starting with the bass, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting an FT or F snare or F hat in between and kind of demonstrate what that sounds like. So if we're starting with the what I'm going to do is do that a few times, and then I'm going to switch up a couple of sounds and just see if you can tell where I'm slotting in the new ones. So let's see. And just by adding just a sound in between, slowly changes the way it sounds. It's not super dramatic. It's not like changing the snare or adding in like another kick. But doing that is forcing your mouth muscles, again, forcing that muscle memory to get used to different navigations around sound sets. And that's really important. And so I was messing around with this pattern saying, okay, what can I do to change the overall sound set but keep the same idea of practice? And I was coming up with like a drum and bass type one to use with PF snares. Let's see if I can remember what I was working on. I really should write down and record a lot more of this stuff. But if we're talking about, that's what it was, okay. Let me change the caption before I forget. And then I'll explain what I'm doing here with that. So kind of a modified drum and bass tempo. It was kick, PF, FT, T, F, PF snare. FT, T, kick, snare. And pretty simple, but again, you start slow, just doing. And then, just like the other one, you start pushing the speed faster and forcing the sounds out much quicker in a rapid chain. And from there, it starts becoming a more of like a speed drill. And so for that one, if I were to speed it up and just try and see how fast I could push it, you might get something like. And that's really good practice. It's focusing on different parts of the sound set in your mouth than the one I was practicing before. And I think it definitely helps with that PF snare consistency too. So those are two drills I wanted to sort of talk through, because in the future I might be doing more with those and modifying the sounds put together. And then if people wanted me to create like a reference sheet or like a drill sheet, then that might be something I can do in the future and just say, here's some good patterns written out in beatbox notation that shows, how to do the sounds, so you learn them individually, and then start putting it into practice with the actual drills in conjunction with something like a metronome. And that could be a good resource for anyone who's interested. So I'm open to doing that. We'll definitely be talking about that more in the future, I think, because I can sit here and talk about sounds all day long, where they come from. But for people who want to learn and get into beatboxing, having good resources for practicing, I think, is helpful. Again, I'm not really a teacher for beatboxing. I'm kind of forcing myself to regurgitate how I learned so that people who might be getting into it can learn easier. And that's why I focus on some of the sound theory discussion when it comes to practice and how to practice efficiently. Well, let's see. I think from here, I want to segue into the actual BGM brainstorming and loop station stuff. So I know I just changed my caption, but I'm going to change it again, because today's focus is going to be on experimenting with new techniques. So let me change this, and then I'm going to sit down and kind of talk through what we're doing here. All right, let me adjust my sound setup here. All right. I just realized I did not turn my desktop audio on. Good thing we didn't have any alerts, but now those should be audible so I can hear when stuff is going off. All right. So what are we going to be experimenting with today? One thing I want to work on a bit that's sort of been a work in progress across all these different sessions when it comes to the loop is the idea of constructing the sort of structure and skeleton of the beat. And just a sort of a recap for folks who might have missed it in the past. Well, now I get to make sure all my loop settings are good. You can establish a rhythm for a loop track in a bunch of different ways. And depending on how you watch loopers in the scene do it, they use a bunch of different techniques and no one does it the same way. And it's very versatile. So you could do something which is what I default to a lot of times and I'm trying to break away from, where you create the entire bass rhythm loop for something and record that and then have that looping. And so you're essentially creating the drum rhythm bass and looping that. So what does that sound like? If I was going to record it, and here we can test the playback and everything too, I might do a really simple rhythm, just like a, and record that section, and then that measure of the rhythm is going to loop forever. So that would sound like, and it's not entirely seamless, but for the sake of demonstrating, it'll be fine. So if we record our bass structure for the rhythm, we can overdub and re-record on top of what we started with and add additional things that are going to flesh out the rhythm. We can add additional snares or effects. If I wanted to add a hi-hat run to this, I could try that. It'd be conflicting with the hats that are already there, but again, for the sake of illustrating how we're constructing a beat, I take that off. Pretty simple. We can add a layered snare on top of the PFs that are in there now, add like a sharp rim shot or a K snare, and that sound like. And then the sound changes that way. And then we could do whatever else we want to the main rhythm, and it's all locked into one track. The other main method that I see that I'm not as good at when it comes to beat construction and setting up the rhythm with the loop station is to do it kind of component by component. And my understanding is the loopers are using a sound to set the BPM tempo, since my understanding of how this works is the loop station takes the first recorded track and it syncs up the overall song, if you will, BPM to whatever is first recorded. And that might be a toggle somewhere, but by default, if you set up something that's like 130 beats per minute, then that's what's going to set. Like, this is set at 98.3. I have nothing recorded. Everything's cleared off. And if I go for, let's say, a more electronic type sound, and I do like a quarter note kick line, let me go. That's 132 beats per minute. And that has been established as the overall song beats per minute based on that first series of kicks. And so what I've seen people do when they're doing it this way, let me get the playback down a little so I'm not talking over it. They'll either use a hat or a kick drum like this to set the BPM, and they'll start constructing things around it. And it's really kind of neat to see them do that because you're hearing the rhythm get constructed instrument by instrument as it's looping. And I want to get better at doing it because it's a different technique than what I'm used to doing. So if we were to illustrate what I'm talking about, let's see if I can do it effectively. If we're taking the kick and we'll leave it on its own track, I can overdub it if I wanted, and I guess it'll come out differently depending on which technique I use. So if I try and overdub it and put like a hat, like an offbeat hat, so like that, all I have to do is just overdub on the track that's playing now, and that would sound like this. It would sound like that. Now, because I recorded a singular kick, and that's what it's sort of looping, I don't know if I have enough room on this one track to overdub a snare. I could try it because I can just undo it if it doesn't work. Yeah, okay. So because it's a single measure that's recorded with the kick, there's not enough room to really fit a lot of stuff around it. And you're getting kind of a small repeating part, but there's enough room for the hat, which is why I got it on there. If I try and put a kick, it's going to just do the kick over and over again like quarter notes. But what I see people use in technique is they'll put other effects on different tracks, and it should allow them to record that separately, but still have it sync up rhythm-wise. So let's see if we can get it to work to put that K snare on something else and have it still fitting into the rhythm. Let me drop that down a little bit. And so now we have a kick, hat, snare, all synced up more or less. And it's occupying 2 tracks of the loop. And again, we've constructed the different parts of the rhythm separately, but they're all sort of playing together because it's syncing to the same BPM. Again, 132.4 beats per minute. And what's neat is, depending on how you record the supplemental parts of the rhythm, you can add additional layers to that instrumentation and that rhythm. Like one of my favorite loopers, Brez, does, he likes putting like a shaker type sound, like a, let's see, which one does he use? I could do like a, that's the one that I like to use. And we could put that on the snare because it's got a slightly larger window for the measure that was recorded. So let's see if we can get that to work. We go. What I wanted was a constant one and not a break. Let me see if I can do that again. There's a little bit of an overlap with a doubling up of the shaker, but for the sake of what we're demonstrating here, it's fine. So from here, your options of adding to the other tracks, again, we're using 2 of 5. And we've got 3 other ones that we can record whatever we want when it comes to basses, synths, a whole bunch of things. And it really does sort of open up the flexibility of being able to manipulate different parts of the track. And I think that's the biggest advantage to doing the construction sort of fragmented instead of having it all on one. So what do I mean by that? if we turn on something like beat repeat, we can manipulate different parts of the track separately. So if this was all put onto one, turning beat repeat would cause just the whole rhythm to loop. But right now, I can turn off track level effects for everything except the kick. And so if I turn beat repeat on, you should be able to hear how the kick is repeating and it's speeding up, but the hats and the snares, the shaker and the snares, unchanged. We could turn it on, or if we wanted to, for the sake of song construction, just have it apply to the kick. Or if we flip it around vice versa, we only have it applying to the hats and the snare. Now that's speeding up, but the kick is still maintaining its steady sound. And a thing I learned, again, this was from Brez. I really like watching that guy's tutorials. He's very, very informative when he's talking about loop technique. Turns out you can just turn off track level effects with a button. You don't have to go and flip over and do a toggle. And you guys can't see my loop station, but by just hitting the edit button, which is flashing to show a track input is active, or track effect, I just push it and now it no longer applies to that track and can do it track by track. So I can turn the beat repeat on the kick on, off, just with a button. And I didn't know you could do that. It's very handy. It makes it a little bit easier to manipulate around the effects across, 5. Let's say you have a drop or something you only want to apply to 3 of the 5. You can do that just by hitting the buttons. It's very neat, very handy. So if we turn off beat repeat, we can think about other things with our sample rhythm here. And maybe I'll turn this into a BGM track. We'll see how it sort of evolves and what comes out of it. I mostly want to demonstrate some of these new techniques that I've been learning and researching this week. Drop that down. And another one uses, I think it's technically clicks, but it's using a sound or effect called pitch bend and I think reverb. So let me do the sound first and demonstrate it, because I don't think I'll be able to talk while I have the effects active, and then kind of explain what I'm doing. I'll work backwards. So let me try and remember how to do this. All right, let me turn my dynamics back on. I'm going to assume it's very faint and hard to hear. This really faint kind of buzzing, almost farty noise is something that can be done with pitch bend, but I might need to tinker around with actually balancing out the effects, because it's used to create like a really metallic synthy buzz noise, almost kind of like a kind of springy noise to it. But I can't remember, because again, I wasn't practicing this one most readily. I learned this at the beginning of the week. But you can basically take that sound and turn on pitch bend, which I hardly ever use. Pitch bend is an effect that basically kind of octavizes a sound and takes the input, and you can kind of like bend it up, kind of like you do on a string on a guitar. And if you combine that with some of the other effects, then it creates a really interesting sort of sound, like an artificial, almost robot noise that's different from things like the ring modulator and some like the granular delay. Let me try and mess around with it without having the beat interfering, and see if I can figure out the combination. As I'm pretty sure it was reverb. Reverb on input C, pitch bend on A, and then you sort of mess around with the knob as you're doing inputs. So let me see if I can figure it out, and then if I can, I'll re-record it. So I'll put reverb about 50%, and I'm going to turn on pitch bend. And I never tried talking. I don't think you'd be able to understand me if I turn that on. Sorry. Speaking inputs give that kind of squeaky noise. I'm going to mess around with different ones and see if I can zero in on what specifically I was trying to do with this, and then we'll slot it into the recording. But when I have it on, you can't understand what I'm saying. It creates that much distortion over a sound. So let me mess around with it for a second. We'll see if we can slot that into the loop. All right, I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to mess with it a bit. You're going to hear some weird noises, so just bear with me for a sec. All right, it's not the cleanest, but to sort of demonstrate what I was trying to do there, using pitch bend and reverb. I wonder if the EQ is interfering with that. Basically, this allows us to create sort of a synth, a note-based synth, instead of something that's just a sound. Obviously, if I was going to redo it, I'd want that note progression just be 2 steps and not kind of waver around. But for the sake of the demonstration, I wanted to sort of explain how you can use this combination of commands to completely change the type of input sound you're getting. And I've never used this in a loop, and I really want to get better at doing it, because you could do some really neat stuff with having this particular type of sound. So if we take our beat and sort of flesh it out, let's put a bass line on it, maybe like a singular note, guitar to bass, give us some low end, and then we'll mess around with other components here and maybe swap out things like the high note here. By just putting a really simple guitar to bass, like electric string bass line under the whole thing, now what we've done is sort of create the basic skeleton of a track. If I turn off the high note there, if we're taking this whole sample beat here, and let's say we were at a show or a battle and we were performing it, what would be the challenge to do on the fly and essentially doing it live, as it were, would be all of these different instruments, sounds, and everything, from the basic skeleton of the rhythm to the high note synth. If we were doing it in that order, you are doing all that on the fly. You can have the settings preloaded for each of the input effects, so you don't have to tweak everything on the fly. But as far as creating the sounds, you're doing that live and then layering it in. And watching loopers do that on stage at places like GBB is really impressive, because again, they're doing it all on the fly. You can see them hitting buttons, getting things recorded, and then some stuff you can hear, some you can't, because they'll turn faders down so you can't hear them putting stuff into the beat. But the way they're doing it is so seamless and so complex. It's really impressive to watch. I love watching loopers. That's why I wanted to get into it to begin with. It's such a fascinating form of music. And the RC505 Mark I that I'm using is very, very powerful. I can maybe utilize 5% of its total potential, having been messing with it for almost 2 years now. I want to learn more, which is why I've been watching tutorials and doing research on different sound techniques, because watching people that are doing loop station demos or battles with just this device I'm using, just nothing else, no additional sequencers or sound devices, just this. You can create some mind-blowing stuff with a singular device using the different commands and techniques and sounds just built into the machine. And it's really fascinating. And so as we sort of proceed in the future, I'm going to be trying to experiment a little bit more on the jam streams with different techniques. And when I learn a new technique and want to sort of explain it, I'll bring it to a session like this so you folks can hear me explain how it works, and then we can use that as an additional tool when it comes to coming up with BGM ideas. So let's see. Let me stop the loop there. There's a couple here. I have them written down. I didn't write down the pitch bend one. I might need to go back and do that. But there's another one, and it's just a singular technique. I'm looking to see if it combines. Yeah, it's just one, and it's one I don't use very often. And it's the phaser. And the phaser normally creates the sort of laser like distortion around whatever sound you're creating. Let's see. Let's turn the beat on. I'll demonstrate it here. I might need the high note. There we go. You can hear it creating this sort of warbling distortion around the high note. And it kind of sounds, like a laser beam. That's phaser. And it's not one I use again, but I learned that by tweaking the settings on the actual effect itself, you can completely change what it does to an input. And it's really neat. So I'm going to try and demonstrate that here. All right, stop that. So let me see if I can do it with just EQ on track A, because I think my settings are all on track A here. I'll double check. No, it looks like they're... Was it on C? I remember where I put it. Okay, yeah, it's on C. So let me turn dynamics back on so I get more boost and I can talk. There we go. And so let me turn on the effect and then I'll explain what it's doing if it works properly. Let's see. Turning. There it goes. So what phaser is doing with the settings that I have here is it's taking that laser sound effect and it's doing it at such an extreme level that it sounds like kind of like a bubbly, bloopy noise. And it's such a very weird distortion. And the intensity of the effect is determined by the knob that you're turning. So how high you have it, the effect cranked up determines how weird it sounds. But you can do it to create some really interesting distortion. And if I were to just do a beat, like if I was just going to go and do that whole rhythm while I have that active, it sounds like this. And it seems like it reacts the most to kicks because snares are sharp and you can sort of hear the snare through the effect. But if I was just doing a kick, just like, and I turn that effect on, it would sound like, and so I was thinking it could be fun to take that weird kind of bloopy distortion and put it over like a kick. So if we were talking about, I wonder if I can overdub that on here. So it'll be 1 2 1 2. Yeah, it'll overdub fine. Might be a bit loud. I can try and back off a little bit. I want it to be kind of under the main kick, so it just sounds like there's an additional kind of bloopy complement to the original kick. Let me try and redo that. Turn the effect off. Here's what it sounds like without it. Here's what it sounds like with it on. it sort of rounds out the sound of the rhythm on the kick, which is very interesting. You could create a whole distortion line using this phaser effect and do some really wacky things. Like the way I learned how to do this was watching a breakdown of one of the most skilled loopers in the scene from France, Sorrow, in one of his, was it 2017 battle? The really famous one that you hear or see on battle highlights. He uses that effect to create kind of this almost like a record scratch effect, and he's just doing that by turning the settings up and then beatboxing in the mic, and that's how you're getting the very interesting sound. Not one I would have readily thought to experiment with. And so doing some research and learning from tutorials this week has taught me that individual effects can be dramatically altered by just changing their settings. Because this is taking that laser sort of filter and messing around with different components of the setting, which you just do in the loop. You just toggle over and you can tweak things up or down. Doing that creates effects that are dramatically different. And when combined with other effects at the same time, it does it even more and can lead to some really wacky things. And that kind of segues into this other one I wanted to show off. This one uses panning delay and reverb. This one I'm not going to be able to talk through, so I'm going to try and get it recorded, and then I'll go back and explain what's happening. So for this one, I need reverb and panning delay, I believe. So let me see if I can get the sound recorded, and then I'll turn everything off and then turn my mic dynamics back on so I can explain it. All right, let me turn everything back on so I can talk again. Let me see what I recorded. Turn off reverb. Okay, so this is not perfectly captured for what I was trying to do, but I can explain this a little bit and kind of explain what happened. So by turning on panning delay, and I have it paired with reverb because that's what the effect tutorial was talking about. Panning delay normally does what it sounds like. It creates kind of an echoey delay, and it pans the sound kind of around in your headphones to make it sound like it's coming from different sides. If you tweak some of the settings on panning delay and then turn on reverb and then just do a click, it takes that original effect and it creates this, I don't know what you call it, almost like a static synth. And once you do that, it just goes. And I've seen people use this, and I always wondered how they did it, and I finally learned this week. Basically, you're using a sound to trigger the buzzing noise, and then it's just a flat note. And it goes forever, and you actually have to turn the input or the track effect completely off, otherwise it'll do it forever and it'll keep layering on itself. But once you have that panning delay flat note, you just go into its settings and you tweak the time, what's called the time setting. And that time setting adjusts the pitch of that buzzing sound either up or down depending on which direction you're tweaking it. And so you could take that and basically use it like a step synth. And that's what I was trying to do, and create like a 2-step progression that goes down and then up. And you're doing that all while that noise is going, and it's just turning the loop on to capture what you're doing, and that is the really difficult part I'm still trying to master. Edward says, oh, so it's meant to sound like that? Yeah, so let me turn off the other parts here. The flat buzzing that you hear is triggered by just turning on the effects and then doing like a click input, and then it's just flat. The time setting, which I just toggle over in the loop and use my knob to go up and down, that's what's causing the pitch change. And you can do that as much as you want and go up and down. You can combine it with other things and break it up. Like I think slicer is one way to do it, where it's more like a stuttering type sound, and you can change the pitch that way. But sorry, I'm gonna turn it off. Using that effect, you can create some really interesting kind of synth melodic sounds using that, and it's very powerful. I'm still learning how to kind of get good with it, but again, this is just a combination of panning delay and reverb, and I did not know that you can generate that type of sound. I'd heard people do it and was always wondering if they have like a synthesizer plugin or something, but no, this is all just done with one effect on the loop. Like, let me see if I can just do it without reverb on. If I turn on panning delay and leave dynamics, let me see if it'll work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on and then see if I can just trigger it again. But if I use a all right, let me see what that actually sounds like. All right, so again, that's a really messy example, but triggering the sort of buzzing noise is the first step, and that was actually just a spoken note. I said one word and it created that lower, slightly lower version versus when I did the click. But once it's buzzing, all it is tweaking the time setting, and it's going up or down in notes. And so I see people use that to create like a drop. They'll record the like heavy low end using that technique, and then they'll slot it into a drop, so you're getting like a real like really sharp, aggressive sound. It's really neat. But it's tricky in you have to be really careful what section you capture, and then you got to turn it off, because if you leave it on, it'll start layering on top of the recorded and overdub, and you'll start getting it doubling up. And that's what happened on that one I just did. You can hear it come in slightly louder because it's looping back and layering the panning delay on top again, and that's one thing you want to avoid. Edward says it sounds kind of like a clipping beat. Yeah, I can hear that. What it sounds like is what my computer does when it blue screens. And it's kind of a scary noise. but it's got a lot of potential. And I'm messing around with how to sort of structure the noise and effect properly. But it's one thing I learned, and it's really kind of fascinating. So I wanted to show that off today. Let me see. Let me save this. I don't know what I'm going to do with this particular one. But what I was working on yesterday, day before, I was messing around and practicing. I did sort of create a song that takes this effect into account. So let me see if I can demonstrate it here. I don't even remember which track is what. This is going to be very simple. Similar, rather. But this one I actually recorded with intention. This one actually has the distorted synth noise recorded the way I wanted, and it took a few tries to actually get correctly. But basically, it's a sustained note, step down, step back up, and then it goes higher. And so this is sort of more along the lines of what I was trying to do in the sample there. I'll go ahead and turn it off. That one I'm gonna most likely turn into a dedicated BGM track. I'll figure out what to call it later. But again, very interesting combination of effects to create something really unusual. And I'll be messing around with it more to see kind of how I can maximize the usefulness of that particular effect. All right, let's go back to our other track. I just realized my sound settings are slightly different across those two. We'll stay on this one for now. So let's see. We'll keep dynamics about there, EQ about there. Hopefully it's not feeding back too bad. So if we think back to all the different techniques and different sound settings and whatnot I've kind of been learning, one of the first major ones that I learned from my beatbox teacher was combining the granular delay and filter to create that. It almost sounds kind of like a chime type synth. And that one, I want to work with this sample beat, but I'm going to take some stuff off. Okay, we can lose that. The pitch bend one is also something I want to work with a lot and get better at too. But the filter one, let's see, let's see, I think it's filter at about 50. Let me mess around with the settings and see if I can remember exactly where it is. Basically, you turn on filter and I believe granular delay, and by messing with the knob, you can change the pitch of that sort of synth type sound, and I've used it on a couple different beats so far. I want to get better at that one too. So let me see. All right. Let me turn everything back on so I can talk. I didn't duplicate the sound exactly, but this more or less demonstrates what I wanted to talk about. The combination of filter and the granular delay creates this kind of, it's a different type of mechanical, almost beeping noise, kind of like you would hear on like a console. And I think you could do a lot with that too. That's why I've kind of tried to mix it in with other sounds. Sour Lad says Pong DX. Yeah, it doesn't quite sound chiptune-y, but it sounds like something you'd hear on some sort of electric or electronic device. What happens if you reverse it? If you reverse it, you get kind of more of a, it's like a fading in and fading out type sound, which is pretty neat. And I specifically recorded that sound on track 3 here to be offset from the main rhythm, just for the sake of accurately demonstrating how it works. I imagine if we were going to turn this into an actual full fleshed out BGM track, we'd want to have kind of like a bouncy bass line that pairs. Oh, I remember another thing I wanted to show off. Is it? Another track level effect that I've been messing around with. You can do it on inputs too, it's the same. But I learned how to use this by watching tutorials again. Now I understand how the command works. And that's the octave feature. You can basically take the octave feature and use it to alternate or pitch up whatever you want it to apply to by a certain amount of steps. And I never really messed around with this because I haven't really done a whole